Hello, people of Earth. Hello, the internet. Hello, Jason Isaacs. We're back. We're back with Tyranny in the USA by popular demand. Can't imagine what's made people think about that. But here we are, nevertheless, talking about autocracy and the tyranny of the majority, what it says in the Constitution, what it doesn't say in the Constitution, and what's happening now. And, of course, you should know that what it says in the Constitution and what's happening now are two radically different things. If you haven't worked that out by now, you may want to go back and start from the beginning. Anyway, we're talking now about tyranny in the United States, and we're going all the way back to the founding mythology of the United States. And here in this particular slide, I've got a still from John C. Green's really, really excellent video on the Constitution, on the writing of the Constitution. It's number 8 in the history of the crash course on American politics. The key point I want to get across here is that when the Founding Fathers were writing their Constitution, they were absolutely terrified about tyranny. Particularly about two different types of tyranny. We have got tyranny from above. Let's call that autocracy. That is the power of the state. And we all know that according to the Founding Fathers mythology, the United States was founded because the king was too powerful, etc., etc., etc. But that wasn't the only type of tyranny they were worried about. Oh no, they were also worried about rule from the mob. The idea there being that, generally speaking, the masses were asses. And so we seek to protect from the rule of populism, the hard fist of populism, because, you know, if we give power to the people, they're going to do something really stupid, like, I don't know, elect a semi-sentient tangerine to be president. So fear of the majority is going to cause us to guard against that as well. Oh, I'm not getting the sound. Damn. If you haven't seen Blazing Saddles, you really should. Anyway, back to the show. The tyranny of the majority. The masses are asses. Let's not give the people power. They'll do something stupid. But at the same time, we want to guard against autocracy too. So let's get some definitions in there. You can read these by yourselves. The critical thing there, trickier thing, I suppose, is the tyranny of the majority, the ability of a persistent many to dominate the persistent few through the democratic process. I don't need to tell any left-handed people about this. You know all about the tyranny of the majority when you're trying to write, and indeed when you're trying to open a bottle of wine. But in politics, it's something that we really need to try to break up. And we do that through an idea called disrupted democracy, and I'm going to come and explain that in a little more detail. But first of all, generally in terms of preventing tyranny, we've got 3 levels that are going on. The first is fairly straightforward. It's the separation of powers and checks and balances. We've done this already. We know that we take power and we divide it up, and we set one area of power against another. Madison said that the accumulation of all power in the same hands may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. And then he goes on to separation of powers. And then in terms of checks and balances, he talks about ambition being made to counter ambition. So here we have a way of preventing autocracy, preventing one system of government from dominating everybody else. We also prevent that through the use of rights. We have those areas into which the state may not intrude. You cannot abridge my freedom of speech. You cannot abridge my freedom to carry a gun. You can't submit me to cruel and unusual punishments. All of that is about protecting people from autocratic rule. There is that area into which the state may not intrude. And we also make it hard for the state to intrude on life by breaking it up. On a vertical level, we've got a separation between the federal government and the state government. State governments do their own thing. So we're disrupting power there. We're preventing autocracy by dividing power up on that vertical basis. And again, making sure that the states' rights have primacy. So we have individual rights that have primacy, states' rights that have primacy. We are therefore preventing autocratic rule from above. And of course, we also prevent autocratic rule from above by looking at democracy. If you've got a government that is misbehaving, the chances are it will suffer at the ballot box. There was a truly alarming study came out a couple of weeks ago about how people, and speaking now in November, 2018, about how a lot of people nowadays seem fairly relaxed about not living in a democracy. That's interesting. If you're not living in a democracy, then you don't have the right to turn around and tell the government, hang on a second, we don't like the way you're governing. Change that, or we are going to go and vote for somebody else. If you're not living in a democracy, you do not have that right. A democracy has no provision for the safe and peaceful transfer of power. Transfer of power in any state other than democracy is going to be nasty. So the whole idea of democracy is that there's an opportunity for the governed to turn around to the governors and say, we are not happy with what you're doing and we demand change. So again, democracy there can prevent autocracy. But we can also look at the way in which democracy can be used to disrupt the power of the majority. We can look at the way in which we take the majority and we break it up. So that we're not constantly asking the same people the same question because we know we're going to get the same answer. So how in America do we disrupt democracy? Well, we disrupt it in three particular ways. We disrupt it through the way in which the question is asked. It is disrupted through the way in which the constituencies are organized, and it's also disrupted in terms of the schedule. So all of these three things in combination make sure that you're not asking the same people the same question at the same time. Now let's drill into these in a bit more detail. The second two are fairly straightforward, so we're going to look at the first one in a lot more detail. Now here we are looking at the way in which the various elements of the states are elected. We'll start at the bottom because that's nice and easy. The House is directly elected. That's democratic. Okay, so there you have the ability of the represented to turn around to those who are representing them and say, hang on a second, we don't like what you're doing, blah, 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 blah. And that's fine. That has not changed. Let's have a look at how the Senate was initially organized. Senators were not originally directly elected, but rather were elected by state legislatures. So we had a form of indirect election there. The senators, the two senators for each house, were chosen by the state legislatures. We're not going to let the individual people make this decision because that would be daft. They're going to make appalling decisions and elect maniacs, as kind of happened a couple of weeks ago. Because that changed. That changed with the 17th Amendment in 1913. 1913, strange old time for the Constitution. We've got the 16th and the 17th Amendment going on at the same time. But that's just going to confuse things. So just remember that the 17th Amendment there is all about changing the organization of the Senate from the senators being sent to the Senate by state legislatures and instead having those senators directly elected. Okay, so far so good. Let's look at the trickier one. Now, this is all about the president. The president was not directly elected. Rather, he was elected by this thing called the Electoral College. Now, he is still elected by the Electoral College, but the mechanics of this are very, very different. And it's not really the place to go into that here. The critical point that I'm trying to get across here is that at each level of the federal organization, the president, the Senate, and the House, they were chosen by different mechanisms. So here you have a straightforward direct election. Here you have, here you had, at the very least, senators being appointed or elected by legislatures. And here you have this bizarre thing called the Electoral College. We are not asking the question in the same way. We're asking, how do you want to be represented? But here, we're asking that through the mechanism of the Electoral College. Here, we're asking that question through the actions of the state legislatures. And only here, at the very bottom, are we going to let the people decide, largely because the House is a rabble and the Founding Fathers didn't necessarily care too much about that. One of the interesting things about this is that the Senate is designed to look up. It's supposed to be looking at matters of USA interest. They are representing the states in decisions that affect the whole of the USA, whereas the representatives are supposed to be looking down, looking after what their constituents are doing on a daily basis. In terms of the difference between the Electoral College then and the Electoral College now, it's fascinating, but it's not somewhere I really want to go right now. All I want to get across is that critical idea that each of these elements was chosen through a different mechanism, and that is going to disrupt the power of the majority to dominate affairs at every time. Right, okay, I hope that's clear, but it will hopefully become clearer as you go on and you look into this a little bit more later. Just for the record, this is what the Electoral College looks like. Each of these states has a different weighting in the Electoral College. That's how it was then. That's how it is now, although, of course, the numbers have actually changed as the United States has grown and the population density has changed. But I don't want to get dragged into the mechanics of the Electoral College right now. What I want to do is to go on and talk about the other two ways of disrupting democracy, and that is on the constituency level and the schedule level. Now, the president is elected by a national vote. The Senate are elected on a state vote, and the House representatives are elected on a district vote. So here we're looking at very, very different constituencies. So if you're asking different groups of people, different questions, you're going to get slightly different answers every time. Similarly, if you're asking about the president every 4 years, you're asking about the Senate every 6 years. Remember, you've got that rolling schedule in the Senate whereby a third of them is up every 2 years. And if you're asking the House a different question every 2 years, again, we're breaking up the schedule. What we're trying to do here is make sure that we're not asking the same people the same question all the time. And we can break it up by method. We're doing it indirectly and directly. We're doing it by constituency. We've got huge constituencies, large constituencies, and small constituencies. We've got a 4-year schedule for the president, a 6-year schedule for the Senate, and a 2-year schedule for the House. That is going to make it very, very difficult for a persistent majority to ensure that it gets its voice, to ensure that it's able to dominate the electoral process at every single level. We are taking direct democracy and we are breaking it up by not using the same methods all the time. That's really what I'm trying to say. I could possibly have said it simpler. I do apologize if I confused anybody. Go back to the start and try again. So there we go. This is how we prevent tyranny in the United States. We have the separation of powers, we have rights, we have federalism, we have democracy, and we have that concept of disrupted democracy. Going down the list, this is how we deal with autocracy, and of course going up the list, that's how we kind of deal with the power of the mob, with the idea of populism. Autocracy and the tyranny of the majority. The founding fathers were as scared of populism as they were of autocracy. The masses were asses. They were very, very happy to have democracy in the sense that it was government for the people, but what they weren't going to do was let the government was to embrace government by the people, because, that's just, well, as I say, semi-sentient tangerine. So, if the question comes up, or if you're asked really about how you might guard, how the Constitution seeks to gain against tyranny, well, this is pretty much how it works. In terms of autocracy, we're separating our power, we're introducing checks and balances. In terms of primacy of the individual in the state, where we've got constitutional rights and we've got federalism, which is breaking up power and establishing no-go areas for government. And in terms of democracy, we're ensuring electoral accountability. Then, on the other hand, in terms of tyranny of the majority, we're looking at disrupted democracy. Again, taking that democracy and breaking it up so that one group can't dominate the process all the time. And again, we're using constitutional rights and federalism so that the majority of states can't tell all of the states how to run their business. And separation of powers and checks and balances, again, just that way of checking power on the way through. I'm pretty much done, but I did say that I would suggest that you have a look at this particular thing. This is John Green's really, really excellent. And my hyperlink isn't working. Maybe that's why. So we're still going through all sorts of silly things there. If we go to crash course. Sorry about this. There we go. We're in there. This is a really excellent crash course on on the way in which the Constitution was drafted, the way in which the Constitution emerged from the Articles government. It is superb. I'm a huge fan of John C. Green. This is possibly his best video, and I'll link to it in the bottom of this one. But that is pretty much it. I think I've just about finished in time. Sorry, I've got to come back. It's just crashed there a bit, but this is the crash course number 8 I was recommending. I'll link off to it in the credits. Sorry about the clumsy editing there, but I really want to get this one out. I'm not going to let perfection be the enemy of the good. I'm just going to say thank you very much. Do send me your questions, and I look forward to answering them as they come up. Thanks a lot. Bye for now.